but we are ready for another matchup here for round number 3. So let's go ahead and kick it over to the stage so we can introduce to you your next players for the second Swiss round number 3 match.
You can start taking a look at our players on stream there. You may recognize some of them. They are, of course, going to be from North America and Europe as well, as we do have Dylan Salvanera versus Mattie Morgan. So NA versus EU. It's going up in a very different matchup. Both trainers leaning on the Zacian, but a monster difference when it comes to the other restricted. One Kyogre, one Groudon. We get to start the discussion and start settling which of those is the best to go with it. They're both carrying the Incineroar, but from there it goes completely differently with a combination of Thundurus, Whimsicott, and Amoonguss for Dylan Salvanera, and then you're going to have the Charizard, Grimmsnarl, and Gastrodon for Mattie. But the leads are on the field. It's going to be Incineroar and Thundurus for Dylan, and then of course the Charizard and the Grimmsnarl for Mattie. So this Thundurus didn't get any of the Defiant boosts. That's probably something that's you wanted to see the opposing Incineroar, but Mattie being very smart and avoiding that one. But of course the Thundurus still has a really nice matchup into something like this Charizard, and being able to catch it with what will now become a Max Lightning could be very, very important if Dylan can stop something like the light screen going up, which there is a very reasonable option in that in the Incineroar. That Max Lightning is going to cause a whole lot of problems.
Yeah, it's definitely tough. I mean, you have the Grimmsnarl on the other side, and Grimmsnarls in a lot of the more recent meta have actually had a bunch of options to be able to slow down opposing Thundurus. It's almost a requirement at this point that Grimmsnarl runs something like a Trick or an Iron Ball or a Lagging Tail, just to be able to have that ability to control the speed just a touch more, and that may give Charizard a chance if that is something that Mattie has. But Incineroar is just going to stop that. We're going to see a fake out right into the Grimmsnarl, so we're not going to see what that Grimmsnarl has decided to do. But on the other side of things, Dylan will go for a huge max airstream into the Grimmsnarl, but it will not be enough to get the knockout. But that speed, very important.
Speed's definitely going to help out in the long run, because there is a chance that this Charizard max airstreams. Not this turn though, as the G-Max Wildfire connects into the Thundurus, and that is going to start causing problems throughout the game with that residual damage between turns, of course. Doesn't look as impactful when the Thundurus is Dynamax, and of course the Incineroar not getting affected by it, but something like that Whimsicott, like that Zacian, is going to take really big damage between turns. I think maybe when you look at Dylan's side of the field, he's thinking, you know what, this Charizard's going to be so scared of my Max Lightning, I know what I'll do. I'll throw a Max Airstream down into that Grimmsnarl and see if I can get a knockout there, and of course the speed boost. But the Charizard playing very confidently. I do like this from Mattie. I do think this team is so dependent on the pilot making the best possible move every single turn. Being able to land that big damage is so, so helpful, as this Thundurus looks very easy to knock out now, as Thundurus forced into some defense.
Yeah, you're going to see the Max Guard here. But not before you also see the Grimmsnarl go for a Reflect. And so looking, of course, at the physical attack damage that Dylan is pressuring on the opposite side, you definitely want to try to mitigate as much of that as possible. Flare Blitz, though, that will be Grimmsnarl's last move, as it does get knocked out. And we will start to see the Max Rockfall, but the Max Guard there, of course, blocking that damage.
Yep, and then a little bit of residual damage. The Thundurus is still able to hold on, you know, would need to get caught by another attack there. And now the Charizard, you know, has to wonder, when is this Max Lightning coming? We haven't seen it yet from the Thundurus, and if you ignore it, that's going to be a problem. That earlier Max Airstream boost could be absolutely essential here, and I like that heads-up play to think about the rest of the game from Dylan. Now that Thundurus, if that Thundurus didn't have the Max Airstream boost, you know what? That was just going to get completely tidied up by this Zacian here, and at least it's got a fighting chance now of being able to do that. The Incineroar's already on the board as well, so you are going to have to switch it out, switch it back in if you want to get that Intimidate. There is, of course, the option to make sure you land a Parting Shot. That would be very, very helpful as well, but that's still a bit of a slower turn than you would think. And finally, for this Thundurus, it lands the Max Lightning into Charizard. But you know what? When it's Dynamax, it's not getting knocked out that easily.
Yeah, that is going to be a ton of super effective damage. Not enough to get the knockout, but we are going to see, of course, that Electric Tree. But what's this? Charizard has a weakness policy that just got activated by that Max Lightning, and now that Charizard is going to be super difficult to deal with. Incineroar also getting knocked out to the Sacred Sword, and it's time for Charizard to shine. Max Airstream here to max the speed boost, but you don't even need it anymore when that Thundurus is just going to get knocked out.
That is absolutely huge, and a very early reveal of one of those meta adaptations that has been coming to the fore as we approach the World Championships. I know a few of us were enjoying the local cuisine yesterday. And of course, while discussing the tournament, somebody mentioned that the weakness policy Charizard was something that people were really feeling coming into this tournament, because you know what? If it's on the field, it's Dynamax. If it's Dynamax, it can take a hit. The most common hit it's going to be taking is something that's super effective. There's so many things that scare it. The Thunderous being quite popular so far, I think, is certainly a concern. And with that in mind, you know, that weakness policy just means you can max Airstream every turn, still get knockouts because the damage is monstrous, and then go from there. The big thing right now, of course, is this Kyogre has come in, revealed itself very, very early. And I can see a world where it's not going to be in a great position quite soon. The Groudon has to be in the back for Mattie, and now he's knocked out the front too. He's just going to be able to take away the rain for the rest of the game. Of course, even before we get there, this Charizard Zacian have a speed boost and can just start doing as much damage as possible, maybe pave the way for Groudon to clean up.
I think that's the one thing that I'm looking at, is the interaction of speeds between the two Zacian that are on the field, but also I think no matter if it's the Gastrodon or the Groudon in the back, Mattie has a pretty good answer to that Kyogre either way.
I mean, it's really able to show off some options here, and if it's the Gastrodon, I'd be a little bit shocked. I think, you know, it's very rare that we see trainers leave their restricted, and I don't know if Gastrodon's as justifiable, but in the face of a Kyogre, it certainly is. The Zacian on Dylan's side, playing it safe, knowing it's one of the back two, has to be smart. We're going to see exactly how much this Charizard can do in the rain, which is usually not so favorable. Here it is, number 9, a Hurricane into the Kyogre. Will it get the confusion?
Oh, no, it's going to go for the Origin Pulse. It will be a double connect as well. And so that Charizard, of course, that Hurricane will be what it has been able to accomplish. Zacian, though, still sitting on the field, but we do get to see Mattie's 4th and final Pokemon, as there is still the G-Max Wildfire chip on the field, and Kyogre gets so low. Yeah,
that's the last turn of it, so it's not going to be able to pick up knockouts that way. Is going to have to do it nice and honest, able to, of course, bring in the last Pokemon. Confirmation that it's the Groudon. Of course, that Kyogre's Rain now gone, so, you know, it's going to have to try and hit Origin Pulses. It can't look at something like the Water Spout. If it does hit the Origin Pulse, it's going to be in the Sun, and it's not going to be particularly well taken. So, a lot of options to think about, and I think the Groudon should just be able to clear up here.
It should, especially when you know that you can't switch out the Groudon, the Kyogre anymore either. It's just a 2v2, and when both of your Weather Setters on the field and Groudon comes in late, Mattie does have the advantage there. But you're still taking as much time as possible in these final few turns just to get as much information as possible. And we will see the Zacian at least go ahead and clean up the Kyogre. That is one restricted down. It's just the Zacian left here for Dylan, and Kyogre does get a chance to maybe come back in this second game, but it's also going to be a Groudon show here. Zacian, for Dylan, does use Behemoth Blade, but this is a tough one because it's not targeting that Groudon. You're hoping at this point for something like a Precipice Blades miss.
This is not the 1v1 situation you want to see as the Zacian. It's probably one of the worst Pokemon in the format, especially when it's single targeting going into you with the Precipice Blades. And there is the easy knockout, really nicely done by Mattie Morgan to hold on to the Groudon to the very, very end and just clean up the game with it.
Yep. You have to, in this matchup, think about the positioning of both of your restricted Pokemon, and also just the Kyogre versus the Groudon.
As the players head on into game 2, not bringing either of these silly choices, just nice standard picks for their team compositions. And it looks like the leads are getting a run back here.
Yeah, absolutely. Both Mattie and Dylan are going to have the same leads. But really, then it comes down to what happens in turn 1 and turn 2. Charizard just got insurmountable value in that first game. And so when you run away with it like that, you definitely have to kind of consider as well. Thunderous just can't go for the Max Lightning anymore unless you know that you have enough damage to follow up to be able to knock out that Charizard before we can utilize that weakness policy.
The Max Lightning not getting the knockout because of the Reflect just means, you know, maybe things change a little bit for Dylan here, right? You are landing that fake out on the Grimmsnarl again turn 1. That's, I think, the safest option because you know the Charizard's going to Gigantamax. But you need to capitalize, right? You need to capitalize on that turn and say, you know what, I'm going to Max Lightning you now. I'm confident that without the Reflect, I'm going to be able to get the knockout. It's a bit ambitious, but I respect it. And then being able to say, you know, if you don't get the knockout, though, you've already caused yourself a massive problem with the weakness policy. So I think this turn decision comes down to how much does Dylan know his calculations on what is going to get knocked out here. You know, you've got to be respectful of that. And without the Reflect, can you just deal with that Charizard early doors? Will the Charizard maybe max guard and just say, you know what, I'm going to wait for that reflect until I feel confident being able to play this game? That could be a nice adaptation. I loved in game 1 that Mattie didn't play that obvious max guard, but now might be the time to throw it out and say, hey, let's mix it up from game 1. Let's see if I can catch you out and waste a turn of the Dynamax from the Thundurus.
I mean, knowing how much experience Dylan has had with the Zacian and the Kyogre restricted pair, I think that Dylan for sure knows what kind of calculations will be necessary here. But Grimmsnarl just kind of going for the reflect. There was not a fake out from this Incineroar this time around, meaning it was going for something else that we will see a bit later in this turn. But the Max Airstream will just go ahead and do a chunk of damage into that Charizard. And you're now just kind of maybe hoping that your Thundurus survives for 2 more turns so you can get through this reflect. But the parting shot as well really could help here, knowing how much that Charizard was able to do in that first game. You just dropped its special attack by 1.
I love that adaptation actually from Dylan, being able to use the Max Airstream again to get your Incineroar out, get the Kyogre in, get control of the weather before the Charizard attacks, and that's going to be really, really big here. And of course, you know, yes, the damage is going to be limited, but, you know, now you're forced into maybe throwing out something like the Max Airstream to keep up. I like that Mattie has done that, but it means you're not landing that G-Max Wildfire.
Yeah, but on top of the Incineroar switch out here as well, you're also looking at the fact that Incineroar can switch back in the face of something like the Zacian or the Groudon, which is something that Dylan didn't get a chance to do, to have that Intimidate drop in the previous game. And so you have to look at that as well, where Mattie might feel forced into a position where you've got to switch in the Groudon, and maybe you can get ahead of that.
It's a really nice adaptation from Dylan in so many ways. Not wasting the fake out on the Grimmsnarl. I mean, in game number 1, he set up the Reflect anyway, so you may as well let him have it now and then go from there. Charizard forced into the Max Guard right now, waiting for this Grimmsnarl trick to probably be more important in this one, as Thundurus obtains the lagging tail there. Thundurus does go for another Max Airstream, maybe worried about the Max Lightning. That's where the Max Guard came through, as Kyogre, throws out Origin Pulse, and in the rain, this is going to do huge damage to this Grimmsnarl, which it does connect with.
Yep. It's not going to be a knockout, though. It's going to be still surviving through that, which means that Grimmsnarl gets a chance to do one more thing, and at least...
I think Dylan's put so many better positions for himself on the board this time than he did in game number 1. Now Mattie is faced with a really tough call, right? You're also against the special attacker, so the light screen is something you want. But you also might need control of the weather. Not now, because of course you have just seen that Kyogre lead the field. But what do you go with? Do you just set up the screen and play out the whole game with screens? Or do you try and get that, something like that Groudon in to land a massive G-Max Wildfire with the boost to make up for that parting shot drop from earlier?
Ooh, that's really unfortunate, the way that the speeds interacted here, because I feel like Dylan would have loved if the Incineroar had caught the Groudon switch in that he might have been expecting, but Incineroar came in first, so the Intimidate already happened. Now Groudon gets in scot-free, and you've got the weather set up here, and despite the fact that Incineroar should resist this damage, you're still taking quite a bit, and you've set up that chip once again. Thundurus, though, just trying to give some type of advantage over to Dylan in terms of speed, will get that Charizard to half health.
But Dylan has a massive speed advantage now. You know, the Thundurus is sat there with 3 Max Airstreams. That's comfortably the fastest thing on the field, and, you know, would be able to maybe polish off this Charizard while both of your Dynamaxes end this turn. You know, as long as you can land the Wild Charge, which I don't think is going to be that big a concern, there's no threat of the Groudon switching, you can deal with the Charizard without having to worry about the weakness policy, and I like this adaptation from Dylan. Do not throw an electric attack at the Charizard while it's Dynamax and behind screens. I'm pretty sure even with the Reflect, that Thundurus is feeling pretty good about its chances, and this Incineroar gets a lot of value too, right? Being able to control the game a little bit better by saying, you know, I have Fake Out, I have very fast parting shots, as we saw in, turn number 1 of the game. Fast parting shots, get the Fake Out back in for later, and the potential follow-up Intimidates as well. So a lot going for Dylan in this turn. A complete turnaround from game number 1.
Really depends on how that Incineroar is trained, though, because Incineroar is still a pretty slow Pokemon, all things considered.
Well, the Charizard did get a speed boost for itself as well, so that it's not going to be able to outspeed the Charizard, but it would definitely be able to catch that Groudon, because all we saw was Max Airstream, Max Guard, Max Wildfire, so this Groudon actually no boosts from any of the Max moves, and that's usually one of the Pokemon you really want to boost up.
Ooh, well, the Fake Out, though. Grimmsnarl's just going to switch in to be able to eat that, as Charizard going for the Blast Burn. that will be a knockout onto the Thunderous, and that really does mean that Dylan's kind of forced in this position. Like, what kind of damage do you put on the board? Do you put your Kyogre down, and is that going to be enough? Or do you bring in Zacian that is having to deal with the Sun here, and also a Charizard in its face?
I don't think you can put Kyogre in now, right? I think you have to save that Kyogre until the Groudon's locked in, potentially. And with the Charizard and Grimmsnarl quite low, you pick these off, make him bring the Groudon, do the reverse, right, of exactly what he did to you in Game 1, where you go, you know what, I'm going to win in this one. The speed boosts are completely null and void at that point. I mean, the Charizard still has a speed boost, of course, making sure, even though that Thunderous was trying to catch up in speed, we do have to remember about that lagging tail that was switched on earlier. You know, while the Thunderous was boosting up, lagging tail means it doesn't get that chance. And I like that Charizard takes advantage of the Sun with the Blast Burn, just doesn't have to worry too much, of course, about some of its big moves. As Zacian can just quick attack here, you know, that's going to help out a little bit, make sure that Grimmsnarl doesn't get the opportunity to play. Charizard doesn't get to play this turn, so that gets knocked out, and that horrible last two situation with your Groudon in would be a problem, but the solar power is going to get it.
Oh, I mean, that's definitely what Dylan is hoping for, just at least a knockout there. And so it feels good that at least the solar power residual is able to short up the knockout onto the Charizard. This does force Mattie down to his final two Pokemon for this game. And when you know in the back it's going to at least be the Groudon, you see the Zacian on the field too. I think Dylan's feeling pretty good that he is going to have the weather advantage at some point in this game.
There's a very quick way to get the weather advantage too, and that's pivot out the Incineroar, maybe with a hard switch or a parting shot. The Intimidate on the way back in is going to be max value, with both of them being physical attackers. So Dylan just has to maneuver this game. I mean, at some point, the big thing is just getting control of the weather. Yes, you would like the Kyogre to be sat in the rain and able to capitalize on that, but, you know, you've got to be careful. The big thing here, though, the Groudon is so threatening to both of these Pokemon, you've got to be confident you can clean up.
And also, like, the Incineroar actually didn't get that many boosts. So you actually, have to go for Protect here. And that's really smart, knowing that the Zacian is pretty fast Pokemon overall. And you're going to see Mattie is just going to go ahead and miss the Sacred Sword because of the Protect on the Incineroar. And that means it's taking Behemoth Blade damage here from Dylan Zacian. It still hangs on, but Groudon, you're hoping for a miss here, goes into the Protect, but it will connect onto the Zacian as well.
Yeah, I think you need that right here. Being able to get that knockout is absolutely huge, and we're now down to the 2v2. The critical hit, probably not too relevant in that one, as Zacian is very regularly knocked out by the non-critical hit version. But the Incineroar saving itself for this turn, realizing that, you know what, there's more it can do, and something like, you know, being able to tidy up is big. I mean, its Flare Blitz isn't going to be super huge, but it can just sit on the field and parting shot if it needs to. Of course, the Kyogre has a fantastic matchup here against the Groudon. The Kyogre has taken a little bit of damage, though, and that's going to be concerning when it comes to some of these numbers, particularly if it misses any of its attacks.
Wow, especially if we see, like, Play Rough. I mean, that just could be a thing. And we've definitely seen Play Rough just do a lot into opposing Kyogre before. Even if it's holding something like an Assault Vest, that's not going to be able to save it from something that's a physical attack.
I think as well, this Kyogre's in a sticky situation because it's just below that threshold of where, you know, Origin Pulse is more valuable than Water Spout, and being below that really limits your options. So this Kyogre playing it safe on this turn. The Zacian going for the Sacred Sword into Kyogre is big here.
Yeah, Incineroar just gets to go for the Flare Blitz. It is going to be in the rain, but the Zacian is so low that it does get the knockout. And so that means that this Groudon, even if it does end up taking out this Incineroar, the Kyogre is just usually a faster Pokemon. You get a big reveal here, though, that Incineroar is going to be Shuka-Berry as its held item, and it still hangs on despite that. Wow.
That's mad value on the Shuka-Berry there, being able to stick around it from half health. Really, really important, as this Groudon just isn't going to be able to close this one out. I mean, the Kyogre should just move first and catch it. As long as it hits, of course, we do have to caveat that. As long as it hits, it'll be absolutely fine. And that's something that I think even when it comes down to, you know, the single target, maybe that opens up options for Dylan in this one because it is still in the rain. So yeah, pivoting back to the Water Spout, I like that he forces it into this single target situation. Really, really helps him and lock up this game. And we're going once again to game number 3 here.
Yeah, in those final moments as well, even if you have the Origin Pulse, I don't think you risk missing, because that puts you in such a bad situation. So despite the fact that you're not full HP, you do have the fact that you have the rain up, and of course, so as you mentioned, the single target that does make sure that Kyogre can secure the knockout here.
We did say at the beginning of the day, you know, what item does the Kyogre take? Well, you know, some people really love the Assault Vest on it. But I think that Protect is so valuable.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about that more later, but we have definitely seen kind of a return to some type of damage-boosting item like the Life Orb or the Mystic Water, and so we haven't seen the recoil. I'm going to kind of assume here that it's going to be Mystic Water that that Kyogre is holding. But it is game number 3, and this will be the deciding factor between who is going to keep that perfect record heading into Swiss round number 4, and it's the what we've seen and come to expect, I think, in this match.
It's definitely the smartest lead for both of them, and it just works. It's not too aggressive, it's not too defensive. There's options on both sides. It's nicely balanced, and you both have a nice Dynamax option to lean into early on, which both trainers have been doing in turn number 1. I know we look at it in some other games where maybe a late Dynamax is a big pivot, but I just can't see that happening in this game with, once again, the Thunderous Dynamaxing. There we go, the Dynamax coming through on what I hope is the Charizard. If it's the Grimmsnarl, we're going to have a very different game that I don't think either of us are particularly prepared for.
Unless it's a Gigantamax Grimmsnarl, that would might make things a little interesting here. But no, it is going to be that Charizard. And seeing a run back of these turn 1 Dynamaxes, you look at the teams and you kind of think, like, do you have to go for this? Yeah, you kind of do. But this time around, we are going to see the flinch from the fake out. And
no reflect on this turn.
Nope.
That's big.
No, it's definitely big. I mean, look at how much damage that Max Airstream is going to do from this Thunderous, and the speed as well. Mattie might have to go for a Max Airstream also just to try to match that and keep pace.
It's something that a lot of trainers do think about, but the G-Max Wildfire follows up right away, heading into that Thunderous, doing a good amount of damage, but this looks like game 1 all over again, right? The turn has been exactly the same so far. There's a little bit of residual damage from the G-Max Wildfire, and we're right back to where we are. Of course, things did get a little bit different. Charizard went for the Max Guard, while the while the Thunderous decided to target into it, and the Grimmsnarl set up the Reflect. So there could be some differences there. Oh, the Thunderous targeted the Grimmsnarl, and of course the Incineroar wasn't able to do anything in that one. So that is what I'm looking at. Are we going to run back that turn? Is there a world where this Charizard leaves itself available to potentially get Max Lightninged? And if so, is that Max Lightning enough through a potential Reflect as well? A lot of questions to be answered here, and this, for me, could be a very early turning point.
Well, we saw how much that Max Lightning did to the Charizard in that very first game, and it wasn't enough, and I don't think with the Reflect being active now it would be either. But it's the trick. I mean, Grimmsnarl, it got faked out that first turn, but it's still going to get value here as the Max Guard from the Charizard will protect it from that Max Lightning. And the Flare Blitz as well. Look at that. Dylan was actually double targeting the Charizard, knowing that that Max Lightning by itself through the Reflect was not enough.
And that's a really big read from Dylan that just hasn't gone his way. Seeing it in game number 1, knowing that the Charizard Max Guards in this situation, you know, just so the Grimmsnarl can do something is something that you have to think, well, what's he going to do? Just reflect and attack? Knowing, of course, that calculation from game number 1, you know that after the Reflect, you can take the Max Lightning. So really smart there from Mattie to put up another Max Guard, then set up the trick. Now I want to see this Thunderous is not going to be able to cause as many problems. It's not going to be able to capitalize on those Max Airstream boosts that it had, and it's forced into the Max Guard. Really nicely done there, as of course this Charizard gets the option to throw out pretty much whatever it wants. There's the Reflect with the Prankster ability, and Charizard's Max Rockfall does go towards the Thunderous, so not able to get a knockout there, but the residual damage has started to add up, and this Thunderous looking real easy to pick up.
Yeah, I mean, even if you, because when you have to go for the Protects like that and you're not getting any type of damage, you're still getting into that knockout range. Like, Thunderous is quite low now. Incineroar still has the ability to go for some, maybe a parting shot to pivot around, but it's such a dangerous and precarious position because you don't want to be that player that gets stuck with the weather that you can't change.
What I really like here, just thinking about it a little bit further back, is the way that Mattie changed up the game plan next to the Max Guard. And I think that's being really important now, right? As this Thunderous feels pretty much out the game. And that, as you say, can force the sticking weather. The biggest issue here is, can you get rid of the Incineroar early, or maybe the Zacian if it comes back in? That's kind of the next question that Mattie has to answer to keep pushing his advantage in this game. But Dylan certainly has pivoting options. Grimmsnarl run through everything. There's move 4. It is the light screen, so this Kyogre's going to have an even tougher time late in the game. As Incineroar, you know, doesn't have the sun. It is going to be able to land that Flare Blitz on the Charizard, but that is not a lot of damage, to say the least.
No, and the Incineroar just goes for the Ancient Power as well. That is what that Max Rockfall will be based off of. Super effective. Does not get any boosts, though, and so the Wild Charge will be enough to secure the knockout. Especially knowing that you have that lagging tail now, too. You know you're going to be pretty slow, but that Wildfire damage as well,
it's enough.
That is it for Thundurus.
Honestly,
that's it for this game.
I don't think that's a bad trade for Mattie at all, right? Is maybe you get the boost from the Ancient Power and you feel like everything's going your way. It's not the case, but at the end of the day, you trade your X Dynamax Pokemon for their X Dynamax Pokemon, right? And then you're putting yourself in a Zacian game. Now, the big difference here is, you know, really, if you are going to play the Zacian Mirror, you know, you've at least got Reflect and Light Screen set up, so that's going to help a little bit. But the Groudon coming in really nice and early. I mean, honestly, it's got Precipice Blades. That's looking real good into this matchup. And the thing I don't like about when you're the Kyogre player is it would feel really cool if you could just switch the Kyogre in and avoid a Precipice Blades, but that damage is actually preposterous, and that makes it sometimes a little bit difficult to deal with it here. So a lot of work to do for this Groudon, and you know, the Groudon is going to be able to start causing problems. Of course, the Incineroar could just switch out manually. Then there's certainly some other options here for Dylan, but we're in for a really close end to this game 3 here in round 3.
These are the next few turns these players have to get right. They might need to make some reads here, but it is going to be a Grimmsnarl switch out.
It's kind of done all its work.
Wow, the Gastrodon finally making an appearance in this matchup right here. It's Noah the Zacian. So one of those restrictions for Mattie is actually going to be left at home. Incineroar goes for the Flare Blitz. And while that Groudon, you know, it's going to take a bit of damage here. Oh my gosh, the burn. That's huge. Now this Precipice Blade's damage is not going to do nearly as much as Mattie was going to be hoping for. The Shuka Berry for sure going to keep this Incineroar alive.
This Groudon is looking real lightweight on the damage now. Obviously the Shuka Berry making it look even worse there, but it's going to get caught with a little bit of damage between turns. And while I love the adaptation to move on over to the Gastrodon, you know, how many times has Dylan, you know, we're going back to that similar to game 1. Dylan won that by being able to close out with a Kyogre at the end, and bringing the Gastrodon here feels really, really good, being able to say, you know what, even if you do switch the Kyogre in at some point, I do have an answer to it. The Groudon feeling pretty useless at this juncture, being forced out. Maybe, you know, you've got to ask less of it at this point. You've got to say all you can do is a little bit of chip damage at the end, and this Gastrodon getting just caught by the play roughs. You know, that's going to be a lot of damage as the parting shot. It would have been insult to injury on the Groudon, but at least Grimmsnarl comes in and isn't so affected by that.
Yeah, I mean, and Grimmsnarl too, like, I think you're hoping that maybe it'll stick around to be able to keep some of the screens up and running on the field, but Kyogre now does get a chance to make an appearance as well, but that Gastrodon makes this matchup so much trickier now, because you can't go for the Water Spout that we saw before unless you want to, or you feel comfortable enough giving a boost over to the Gastrodon and knowing that you have a way to shut it down before it gets out of hand.
But the Gastrodon took so much damage that turn from the play rough, and I mean, without the Reflect, that would have been a whole lot more, and definitely looking at a knockout as well. So a really tough situation, and I think having that burn on the Groudon means you're feeling really, really good as the Kyogre player, right? You know, that Zacian's going to be able to take a Precipice Blades, especially spread damage, especially burns. And if you are worried about it, which I don't know if Dylan is, you're just able to switch in the Intimidator as well to really lock that one up. The Gastrodon is being asked to do all the work, and my question right now is, what can this Grimmsnarl offer? It has a Life Orb from the earlier trick, so you don't really want to give that one away. You know, your screens are still up, you know, and they've got a little bit more to go. And honestly, you know, the screens are kind of spaced out a little bit here, so the Zacian, you know, is just going to be able to start throwing down attacks and picking up these Pokemon nice and early. That one's going to go into the Grimmsnarl. Yeah, that one's done for, even with the help of something like the Reflect. And so that's just, you know, being able to cause problems. This Kyogre's going to start racking up the damage on Gastrodon.
Yeah, it has to. It can't let Gastrodon go for something like the Yawn here, because there really isn't a good way to pivot out unless you want to just do those manual switches. Knowing, though, that the Groudon is coming back in, this is actually not a terrible position for Dylan to be in, because you can just switch out the Zacian in favor of the Incineroar and get another attack drop on top of the burn damage that is having that Groudon's damage.
I mean, yeah, I think at the moment, the Zacian just being able to seal up the game is really important here. And the Zacian is going to be doing really big amounts of damage to Gastrodon, especially now that Reflect is gone, and there's no way to set it up. So while it may be tempting to take the Kyogre out to get weather control, I think honestly at this juncture you can kind of just let it go and let them play in the sun. I mean, it's not like the Charizard is taking advantage of it, and realistically your Kyogre's not throwing out water-type attacks anyway.
Yeah, well, but you definitely want to make sure that your Zacian doesn't get put to sleep.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, you're going to see that pivot out. Incineroar coming in, the Intimidate animation here. Groudon at this point is just doing such a lackluster damage that Mattie is hoping for some type of critical hit. And knowing that you have the Gastrodon on the field that is still pressuring something like the Yawn, you have to go for the Precipice Blades and hope that you can at least knock out the Incineroar here. But it's still not enough. It's hanging on as Gastrodon tries to go for the Yawn into the Kyogre too.
Yeah, Yawn into the Kyogre there, really wasted. I don't think it's a big deal on the Incineroar, but at least it would have hit something, or maybe even an Earth Power just to tidy it up. As there goes a little bit more damage down on the Groudon, and the Light Screen's gone as well. So those Ice Beams from the Kyogre are going to cause more problems. Of course, there is a world where maybe, the Kyogre just says, you know what, I'm going for it anyway. I'll give you the boost on Gastrodon. I don't care about that too much. I'll just knock out the Groudon. Kind of, it's not doing too much anyway, but just make sure you've got this easy 1v1 situation. Zacian versus the Gastrodon with no Reflect, with no Light Screen. Could just tidy it up that way. And if you're worried about the Gastrodon weaving in an attack, another Yawn, well, guess what? Your Incineroar just came in. So you have access to Fake Out, and you're able to just slow it down for that turn. So it could be a very null and void turn, but I still think Dylan completely in the driving seat, just able to do exactly what he wants this turn and, swing it back from game number 1.
Well, the Protect here from the Gastrodon.
Okay.
If that was the target of the Fake Out, which it is,
yep.
Now you have potentially the ability for this Groudon to go for something, but it's the Ice Beam, and it will target correctly into the Groudon. It brings it pretty low, but Groudon still has a chance to maybe go for some type of damage. Stone Edge is so lackluster here. And Gastrodon also continuing to just get some recovery to stay in the game, but Kyogre is still so healthy.
That might be the weakest Stone Edge I've ever seen. That might be the lowest amount of damage I've ever seen from a Stone Edge. And that is painful to watch from Maddie's side of the field. This Kyogre refuses to give a boost to Gastrodon, just keeps going with the Ice Beams, finally gets rid of that Groudon. And realistically, what's Gastrodon going to do? It's going to put everything to sleep. It's then going to be able to, start Earth powering stuff. But at some point, you're going to get hit by an attack, and that's just something that I don't think Gastrodon can deal with. So Dylan playing it very safe by avoiding that, but, it doesn't matter when that Groudon, the big final Pokemon in your team, just isn't able to do anything because it's burned, it's intimidated, it's just getting caught short there, and it's really tough to see as, Gastrodon yawns the Kyogre, but at some point, it's going to get hit by the Zacian.
Well, I think that's what was so smart, too, about the Incineroar pivot, is that you don't even need the utility that the Incineroar is providing. You just want your two heavy hitters on the field side by side. You know that Gastrodon is one of the slowest Pokemon in the format, so you're going to outspeed it, no problem. But just, I guess, play it safe. Why not? Get the weather back in your favor, I suppose. Have that Fake Out pressure, but Zacian here, too. Got the Intrepid Sword boost.
It's the most secure board position I've ever seen. If the Gastrodon protects to try and let it go to sleep, then you just fake it out next turn. As play rough lands, no Reflect anyway. Dylan Salvanera taking this one in round number 3.
What a masterful match, though, especially when you have to navigate such a tricky situation. Both players able to take a game off of each other, and then that adjustment at the end to just get the positioning they needed. That was really masterfully done.